the images that were released by the U.S. State Department that basically show a boat approaching the tankers and trying to remove something from the hull. These black and white images were released about a week ago, and then again on Monday, more footage was shown as evidence that Iran is responsible for the attacks on these oil tankers. There's a lot of question over the credibility. Japan and Germany has refused to accept this as enough evidence to put the blame on Iran. What do you make of this?
Yeah, well, look, I'm not in a position to say whether these photographs are, going to prove that Iran was responsible for these incidents or not. Mm-hmm. However, I think what is interesting about the international response is that it shows how nervous the international community is about the wisdom of the Trump administration in terms of its dealings with Iran. Mm-hmm. Most of the world opposed the United States' decision to unilaterally withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal a year ago. Most of the world is upset by U.S. efforts to put a total embargo on the export of Iranian oil. And given that President Trump is rather unpredictable and that he has some advisors who are extremely hawkish on Iran, I think there is a real desire not to give these claims credibility, simply to prevent the United States from taking some sort of military action against Iran in retaliation. And it's a terrible situation for the U.S. to be in, frankly.
It's a terrible situation for the U.S. to be in, but there's something that you said here about how the world is responding, and it shows that they're nervous about this kind of escalating tensions here. I want to sort of refer to also something you said in an article you wrote for The Interpreter in January 2017, where you said, let me quote, "Our president has a lot to learn and has shown a limited capacity to evolve." Do you still stick by those words?
We have seen Donald Trump has quit a number of international agreements, claiming that somehow he would be able to negotiate better deals for these agreements. And so far, we have not seen any indication that that is true. He has certain instincts, but he doesn't have an ability seemingly to follow through. And in the case of Iran, he has now surrounded himself with extremely hawkish advisors who I don't think are interested in a negotiation with Iran. I think they're simply interested in weakening Iran. Mm-hmm. And of course, Iran is showing that it can retaliate.
And I suppose you're referring to here the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. You're talking about Michael Bolton. They've been known and criticized by analysts across the board around the world for having been sort of being very trigger happy when it comes to Iran. And Bolton doesn't have much to go by when it comes to credibility for being objective here, as he was one of the architects of the Iraq wars.
Yes, John Bolton in particular, the National Security Advisor, has been very hawkish about Iran. It's not just that he's written articles suggesting that the only solution to the Iranian nuclear program is to bomb Iran. Mm-hmm. He also has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from an organization called the Mujahideen Khalq, which is a violent cult that opposes the Iranian government, that periodically has conferences, and they have paid speakers from, I'm sorry to say, both American political parties, but John Bolton and Rudy Giuliani, another advisor of President Trump, have been among the most prominent people appearing at these events. So he is not an objective person. And as you point out, he was also, of course, a part of the George W. Bush administration, which used exaggerated, hyped, phony intelligence to justify the invasion of Iraq. So this is also a problem.
What commander of the UN Central Command, General McKenzie, maybe that he would be able to counter this extreme sort of warmongering almost attitude that Pompeo and Bolton are known for?
Well, the head of Central Command is not somebody who can come up against the National Security Advisor or the Secretary of State. May I remind you that we don't even have a confirmed Secretary of Defense. So the problem is there's no one of any stature or sufficient rank to really come up against Trump. Now, that said, the President of the United States does not want a war with Iran, and I would say that most members of the uniformed military in the United States do not want a war with Iran. So what we're seeing now is a lot of threats, a lot of signaling back and forth. One hopes that cooler heads will prevail. President Trump has actually contradicted his advisors. He said the other day in an interview that the attacks on the tankers were, quote unquote, very minor, clearly showing that he does not want to use those incidents as an excuse to retaliate militarily against Iran.
He also, in an interview, I believe it's the same one, said that he would go to any lengths, even a war, if it meant to denuclearize Iran. So it does make the world worry then, rightly so, don't you think, that this man is not really looking for a political solution? Because what Javad Zarif has said already, it's an economic terrorism on the people of Iran who are getting crushed every day by a spiraling economy with these sanctions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think President Trump would love to get a better deal, so-called, from Iran. He just doesn't know how to do it, and he doesn't have the personnel who are capable of doing it. The Iranians, yes, they are threatening now to breach the limits in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which would probably effectively signal that this agreement is dead. There will need to be new negotiations. I think the question is whether they will be with the Trump administration or whether they will be with a successor to the Trump administration. How much longer can the Iranians go with these economic sanctions? Will we begin to see more countries trade with Iran despite the sanctions? There are reports that there are several tanker loads of oil on their way to China as we speak. So perhaps the Chinese will signal that they are willing to violate the sanctions and essentially call the bluff of the United States, dare the United States to go after them. We're in a trade war with China right now.
Right.
So the Chinese may be feeling they have nothing more to lose. It's a very worrisome picture. And of course, as you pointed out, the biggest losers in all of this, the people who are suffering most, are the Iranian people who do not deserve this economic war.